Let's talk about the offensive line, because I'm looking back at like 2023 and we were like, they will be the greatest team in college football history. However, they will only play with 10 players on offense because they have no left tackle. And here we are. And we were like, they better solve this. They better solve this. They better solve this. And here we are. They didn't solve it. They didn't solve it. Here's the thing that, again, when you're doing this 2 seasons out, this was the offensive line that Nathan came up with and we agreed upon in July of 2021, the 2023 starting offensive line. Left tackle, not on the roster. We thought Josh Fryer would be the backup at left tackle, but we were talking a lot about Zach Rice and Emil Wagner, and they've got to get a recruit in here. He's not on the roster. Left guard, Donovan Jackson. Correct. Center, Luke Whippler. Gone. Right guard, Enoch Vamahe or Ryan Jacoby. Ryan Jacoby then soon after transferred to Pitt. Enoch Vamahe still might be the guy. Right tackle, DeJuan Jones. So when we were talking that summer, Nathan, about that, we were talking about very veteran DeJuan Jones still being here, because that was before DeJuan Jones then in August won a job. We still thought maybe he'd be a backup in 21, first-year starter in 22, would be here in 23. So, Nathan, we already had a left tackle hole, but we had 2 veteran starters at center and right tackle who aren't here. And as iffy as that group, not iffy, there was some uncertainty in that group when we did it 2 seasons ago. Looking ahead, we knew there was some uncertainty. We're still like, oh, no, best team ever. And here we are, Nathan, and it's more uncertain, right? Because we are the same questions are there, but we have now taken Whippler and DeJuan Jones out of the equation.
So just to give people frame of reference, July 7th, 2021, neither Luke Whippler nor DeJuan Jones were being projected as starters that fall. So that's why it made it more plausible that they would still be around as starters 2 years down the line. Harry Miller was supposed to still be the starter for the 2021 team, and Nicholas Petit-Frere was going to start at right tackle because we thought Paris Johnson was going to left tackle because we thought Thayer Mumford, well, we knew Thayer Mumford at that point, I guess, was coming back. But we still hadn't seen like the full chain reaction. And here we are 18 months later, and to not have a tackle on the roster is both, or to not have one that they are sure of, is both somewhat surprising, but at the same time, it's really only one recruiting cycle. You don't usually fix a short-term starting offensive line problem through recruiting, especially left tackle. And people are frustrated by the portal thing, but this is the danger of putting your back against the wall with the portal and thinking that you can just reach into the portal and pull a starter out. And the thing that hasn't happened that I think would maybe surprise us is when this portal stuff started first happening, I think we speculated that Ohio State would be able to sort of put out the bat signal or the buck signal, and guys would see it and be like, I'm a pretty good left tackle at, well, I mean, let's use example at Oregon State, where they just got, Tristan Gebbia from. I'm a pretty good left tackle at Oregon State. I'm like a third team all Pac-12 at Oregon State. I can go to Ohio State for 1 year and be a starter on a team that could win a national championship. Why would I not do that? I'm going to, I'll get on the next flight. Like, that hasn't happened. It happened, I think, a little bit with Trey Sermon. It certainly happened in a way with Justin Fields. So I wouldn't say it's never happened, but it's not happening at these urgent needs in these last 2 cycles. Like, tackle was just as much a need last offseason. In some ways, you could have found someone who would be around for 3 years. Not someone who would have started right away, obviously, but someone who could have been around long term. And cornerback absolutely was last year, and they made that decision for their own reasons, and it may be coming back to haunt them. So, like, to be this far into it, and we'll talk about cornerback on the next pod, but like to still be like on such shaky ground at both of those positions, it just proves that that the portal isn't that easy. It's not a fix it for every position, especially at the standards that Ohio State sets, and it's a big issue for this spring. I still would say, if I'm projecting right now, which I did, I think Ohio State's left tackle is probably on its roster. I don't assume that someone's going to shake out in the spring that would then automatically come in and take a starting job. So it's probably somebody on this roster right now who starts at left tackle and backs up left tackle on opening day.
How big a deal is this, Stephen? That the tackle situation right now?
Ohio State's offense is turning into a 7-on-7 team. The skill positions are awesome, but within the trenches, it's just not there. And I agree with Nathan, especially now with NIL also becoming a factor. But even outside of that, like, you're not going to get the Justin Fields, Trey Sermon level guy every single year you go into the portal. I mean, the secondary has been proof of that with Tanner McAllister and even Jahad Carter this year. I mean, that's a quality get, but I don't know if anybody's like, oh, home run transfer portal get, when there were former 5-star recruits also at defensive back in the portal that you did not get there. So, I mean, unless somebody who at some point was like a top 100 recruit and just has not worked out at his place, and he leaves the spring thinking, I need to find a new home. Right now, I would agree with Nathan that there's probably going to be somebody on this roster, and they need some of these guys to grow up fast, whether it's some of these lower-rated Ohio guys they took a flyer on, or even some of the borderline top 100 recruits who are second-year guys who probably need to start making their way onto the field. But in the name of portal guys who were former 5-star recruits, there is a guy in the portal. I don't know if he's still in the portal, but he was in the portal, Keontae Goodwin, a guy Ohio State was in on a 5-star recruit from the 2022 recruiting class. He went into the portal after 1 year at Kentucky. To my understanding, that is not a road Ohio State is currently going down. But a lot can change over the next 4 or 5 months here if it feels like from a talent standpoint you don't have it on your roster. But as of right now, that is not something Ohio State's exploring.
I'm surprised they didn't get somebody. When you look at the 247 Sports transfer tracker, these are their top-rated tackles who were in the portal and where they wound up. You guys don't care what their names are because they're not here. But Oregon, Florida State, Keontae Goodwin, as Stephen mentioned, is third on the list. He has not chosen a destination yet. Auburn, TCU, Oklahoma, Auburn, Miami, SMU, Arizona State, Michigan, Oklahoma State, Tennessee, Florida, USC, Baylor, SMU, Arkansas, Kansas, Buffalo. Those are the top 20 tackles who were in the portal and where they wound up. Just for instance, and this is not saying Ohio State should have gotten this guy because of connection, Miles Hinton was the number 11 tackle in the portal, according to 247 Sports. He left Stanford. He transferred to Michigan. He was a 2-year starter at Stanford. At least he started chunks of games in 2 different years. His brother had played at Michigan, so there's a connection there. I think maybe even his dad played at Michigan. So that's, I'm not saying, but that guy's 11th. Okay. Oh, well, what's the 11th best portal tackle look like? It's like, I don't know, a multi-year starter in the Pac-12, and Michigan got him. Nathan, I'm surprised. I'm perhaps very surprised that Ohio State did not get one of these 20 guys. I almost can't believe it. That between NIL, clear opportunity, and the fact that Paris Johnson and DeJuan Jones are about to be very high NFL draft picks, and Justin Fry, I don't know. We thought Justin Fry had a little something. If Greg Studrawa had struck out in the portal like this, we'd be like, that's it. See a stud. I am perhaps supremely surprised that they did not get a potential or perhaps even sure thing starting tackle in the portal this cycle.
I think that's the tricky phrasing, though, is were any of these guys, like a Johnny Cornelius, the guy they brought in from Rhode Island, who was a good player at that level, but was having to step up to another level to certainly to play anywhere in Power 5, or Jarrett Kingston, who had some good years at Washington State, but wasn't a amazing player at Washington State. Like, were those guys for sure guys that you would say you're going to come here and start? Like, I think they could say that to Jonah Jackson in 2019, right? Like, you've already been like all Big Ten. We know what you are. You're all Big Ten level. Our defensive linemen are saying this guy's tough to deal with. Like, we want you to come here. We think you're probably a starter already. I don't think they were saying that to these tackles. As shaky as Ohio State's situation is, I don't think they were either out of fairness or out of just true assessment of those guys' abilities. I don't think they were saying to these portal targets, you're definitely going to come here and start. We want you to come here and compete for a job. And if you're, I did not talk to Jarrett Kingston from Washington State about this, but if you're him, you're a California native, and you're getting that message from Ohio State, and maybe it's the same message you're getting from USC. I understand why you go to USC. I think that's the other thing. I don't know that there was no doubt offensive tackles to be had. I think there were guys who probably would have won the starting job if they had come here, but that may not have been a convincing enough argument to make them come here. And I get it from both sides.
So give us your two deep at both tackle spots right now.
So at both tackle spots. So at left tackle, I went with what we know so far. Zim Michalski has been developing to win that job, to take his best shot at winning that job. And right now, just based on the way the rest of that line looks, that's who I assume is going to probably start on opening day. The backups I put there were Grant Toutant and Trey LaRue, who are, veteran, sort of, more developmental guys, but they're both in that 6'7", 320 range. And I thought that made sense more than stretching somebody else. There's Tegra Shabola has size, but has more traditionally projected as a guard, even with that size. So I kept him there for now. But if you told me that he made some kind of move this spring in summer, I guess I would believe it. And then a right tackle, that's where I put Josh Fryer. I have George Fitzpatrick backing him up there. But really, we can talk about this relates to almost every position on the offensive line. We talked, should Donovan Jackson be considered at left tackle? We've talked, already about Matt Jones being maybe the likely center to start this year because that makes the most sense based on his background and where else they have some depth and guys who could play positions. Even the two guys who are returning starters in the offensive line may not be returning to those positions because of what the best 5-person fit is.
I think it's interesting that you went with Toutant and LaRue over Montgomery as a second string tackle.
As a second string left tackle, I had Montgomery there. I tell you guys, I rewrote that depth chart just on the offensive line about 5 times. I was up. You can go look at our system. I was up late at night making changes to that offensive line depth chart because you could make some bold predictions here. You could make the bold prediction Luke Montgomery comes in and wins a starting job this year, and he starts as a true freshman. That's not implausible based on how thin they are, especially at tackle. And that maybe if he's good enough, maybe that makes sense at right tackle. And Josh Fryer kicks inside, and that makes, again, the best 5-man unit better. But where he has to catch up size-wise and just how unlikely it is that a guy comes in first year. We've seen second year, no offense at all to Luke Montgomery, but I would say that Harry Miller was probably a better offensive line prospect coming out of high school than Montgomery is, arguably. And he was iffy his second year. Wyatt Davis, we've seen Josh Myers, other 5-star big-time guys come in and be borderline ready that second year. So I wasn't going to put that on Luke Montgomery. I don't dismiss that he could come out and prove it over the next 6 months.
How did Ohio State go from a situation where Paris Johnson could not get on the field at tackle for his first 2 years to a situation where if freshman Paris Johnson was on this roster, I think we would have him penciled in as a starter right now.
Pinned, printed.
He loses to Brandon Bowen, right, as a true freshman. Competes for that job, doesn't get it.
No.
And then
that was Petit Frere competing with Brandon Bowen.
Who was it?
That's Petit Frere.
It was Petit Frere.
Yeah. Paris lost.
Petit Frere lost to Brandon Bowen the year before.
But even 2019, not in PF because there was a physical transformation he needed to undergo. But Paris looked ready to go the moment he got here. Really, he looked ready to go as a senior in high school. So yes, he'd be.
How did this happen? They had 4 tackles 2 years ago when they played Thayer Munford and Paris Johnson at guard because they had 4 tackles, and they played DeJuan Jones and Nicholas Petit Frere at tackle. Any of those 4 guys, they'd be like, oh, sure thing. What else? They went from 4 to none. This is, I mean, I don't, great. There's guys developing.
This is recruiting malpractice.
Zen Michalski is going into his third year as a recruit in the 300s who has not played, who was a late ad after other misses, who is a developmental guy, who Nathan has penciled in as the starting left tackle for a team that has Marvin Harrison Jr. on it. And I'm not saying you're wrong. It's who I'd have in there too. It is. Stephen, that's a strong word, but I don't think I disagree with it. And then I can't believe they didn't go all hands on deck to get an answer here. Listen, we had recruiting malpractice here. Like, promise, guys, whatever you got to promise.
Yeah. I mean, I'm
surprised.
We talked about this problem 2 summers ago. 2 summers ago. We said, yo, this might be an issue. And typically, a program of Ohio State's caliber, the issue actually ends up getting solved. So that's just us being hyperbolic 2 years out because we're talking about what's actually in our face. This is worse than we thought it was going to be. Because at least in those situations, it's like, oh, there's no depth, but at least like in a fantasy world, there's a 5-star second-year guy who's ready to start. There's no depth, so if he gets hurt, what are they going to do? But at least he's here. They don't even have – there's not a he played 79 snaps. Michalski played 79 snaps last year. He was penciled in as the second-string left tackle. But let's just be honest here. Had he actually gotten hurt, if Paris gotten hurt, Josh Pryor probably would have come in for him that game. And then they probably would have spent the next week, depending on how serious Paris' injury was, they probably would have moved Dwan over to left tackle. Because now they have a whole week to prepare Dwan Jones to be their starting left tackle going forward. So him being the second-string left tackle, Michalski, don't really mean much because it's just more for a piece of paper than it is actually what they're going to do on game day. This is a lot worse because you have Marvin Harrison Jr., you have a healthy Travion Henderson, you have Emeka Ibuka, Mayan Williams, but this is not 7-on-7. None of this matters if Kyle McCord or Devin Brown has zero time to get any of these people the ball.
Yeah, in 2021, the backup left tackle on paper, I believe, was Enoch Vamahi, who is a guard. He's a guard. He does a good job filling in, but he's a guard. And, we've talked before about the concept of the plan A versus plan B or farther down the line. And it's great when your plan, not A, adds something extra. Xavier Johnson was not plan A to be a guy making huge plays against Notre Dame, catching touchdowns in the national championship game. That wasn't plan A, but they had all their plan A's lined up, except Jackson Smith-Njigba got hurt. But still, a lot of plan A's were in place, and Xavier Johnson got to be a plan F that worked out. Well, even the guys that we look at, right now, we're looking at this offensive line, and someone like Josh Fryer as being the guy who you can almost count on out of this group, right? He's going to start somewhere on this offensive line, we think. Josh Fryer, also not a plan A. He was a 3-star recruit in the 500s, and he's going to hear things like that. Maybe not because he listens to this podcast, but they're already right now reading and hearing that people have questioned about this offensive line. I'm sure going to hear a lot about this spring and into the preseason about how we doubt them and whatever, and they're using it as motivation. That's fine, but it's just, we judge Ohio State against the Ohio State standard, and what's going to be on the field on opening day on this offensive line right now is not based on the way Ohio State builds its championship teams. It's just not. And that was a big, we talked about it at the time, that was a big burden that was put on Justin Frye when he got here, was now you got 18 months till spring of 2023, or not even that, you got a year going into the spring of 2023 to take these developmental guys and push them up a level. And we'll find out pretty soon if he did.
If Josh Fryer was the one guy, right? Okay, well,
Yep.
They're probably going to – Josh Fryer looks like the 5th starter.
Yeah.
We've seen that a million times.
Brandon Bowen.
Right?
At
the moment, Josh Fryer is their 2.5 starter, right? That's Darrell Baldwin, Chase Ferris, Brandon Bowen, Matthew Jones. We've all seen those guys. Those are great stories.
Josh Fryer is the third best offensive lineman heading into the spring.
He is too far up that list, and that is not Josh Fryer's fault.
No.
But this is the reality of this offensive line.
But what you just said, Matt Jones was a top 100 prospect. Matt Jones was the number 1 center recruit in his class in 2018 or whatever that was now. So that's the kind of guy that used to be the 6th lineman on this team, the utility guy. And that's how
Yeah.
much it's gotten jumbled. So it's a problem for 2023. They don't take a huge step up based on what's on this roster for 2024 right now. It's kind of
Well,
lingers.
Montgomery better be a starting tackle in 24.
Yeah,
It's
but
the only
Right.
offensive line is the only spot in the day era, just off the top of my head, that has not had a top 100 recruit that was not from Ohio.
Yeah. So that's why Stud's not here anymore.
Yeah.
And then Justin Fry came in and in his first recruiting cycle locked down the 3 best offensive linemen in the state of Ohio, and that was great, and did not go out and get that guy, which is why they got the guy from Connecticut who had the Dartmouth offer 6 months before he had an Ohio State offer. Like that guy late because
Miles
they didn't
Walker.
get an out-of-state guy, and now it's on Justin Fry to go do that. Justin Fry has to do that in this next recruiting class. He has to go get a Marvin Harrison Jr. type of guy. He has to go to Jordan Hancock type of guy, top 100 national recruit whose grandpa or grandma didn't meet at Ohio State. So so we have the tackles established, which is Josh Fryer, and we don't know much, but let's do this in combo here, Nathan. We've had the conversation. We had a very hearty, it was kind of like, you do a week of stuff. It's like, hey, we did a week of why doesn't Kyle McCord get more snaps as the backup quarterback? We did a week, however long it was ago, of is Donovan Jackson going to be the left tackle on this team? You have him penciled in as a left guard. He was the left guard this past year. He's not the prototypical tackle body. He is a 5-star recruit. Did you ponder it? But also, it's not like they have a 4 gazillion obvious interior offensive lineman either.
Well,
how did you ponder Donovan Jackson here?
I pondered it in something that you said in the first segment of this podcast, and something that we've brought up a lot, which is the concept of making a choice based on strength or making a choice based on weakness. And Donovan Jackson had a solid year last year. It wasn't obviously, all-American level or anything like that. And actually, if you want to go by the PFF grades, his pass rush, his pass blocking grades were not great. It's a different position. You're moving out to where you're more in space. It's a different scenario, but still, that gave me some pause. But also, I think you would be taking a guy who could be a major weapon in your run game and then moving him outside to a position that he's not accustomed to at this level. And the ripple effects through the rest of the offensive line, I don't necessarily think I don't know that it makes the whole 5-person unit better, because there's a drop with whoever you're filling in behind him at left guard too. So at the end of the day, for this exercise, I projected that they will just decide, hey, we've got a guy who could be maybe first team all Big Ten or better level at left guard, who can get out and really do some things at that position in the run game, and is hopefully getting better, I guess, in the pass game too. Like, keep him there, let him be an anchor on what is otherwise an offensive line where you need to raise the level of some guys. But if he's like the one guy on this offensive line that is of that level right now, and that's the most important position on the offensive line, then maybe you have to think about it, because if something goes wrong at left guard, if something goes really wrong at left guard, it usually costs you less than if something goes really wrong at left tackle, especially with the first-year starting quarterback.
That is fair, because Harry Miller was the weak link of the 2020 line, just because, second-year guy, you're struggling, and the offensive line was fine. But also you had a quarterback who ran a 4.3, so, that probably helps when he can run away from guys. I do wonder if that whole Donovan Jackson left tackle conversation, because he's not tall, but he's got crazy long arms. It is kind of a Trent Williams body type. I know people like to throw that name out there with the undersized left tackles. I don't think the Donovan Jackson left tackle conversation is a him conversation. It's okay, if you're not keeping him at left guard, who'd you plan? So you have Tegra Shabola as a second string guard. If Tegra spends the spring and fall showing he can start at left guard for you because he's taking that jump, then you probably feel more comfortable moving Donovan Jackson outside, because you said it, the drop off from like right now what Donovan Jackson is, even as a guy in the second year who was good, not great. There's a significant drop off between what he is as a talent and what the guy behind him is. If that's no longer true when you get to April, and especially not true when we get out there in August for a practice, then maybe Donovan Jackson is your left tackle. But right now, you have to play the best possible guy at a position. And as of right now, Donovan Jackson is your best chance at having a good left guard because you're not really sure what you have behind him.
So it is one of those things, right? They shuffled guys around 2 years ago because DeJuan Jones showed he was one of their 5 best guys.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like, all right, well, if he's one of our 5 best guys, then what do we have to do to make that fit? If Tegra Shabola, for instance, shows he's one of the 5 best guys, well, you're not going to put him at tackle. So where do you get, right? Maybe you end up shuffling some stuff around. It's one of these things, Nathan, there's such uncertainty at tackle. Donovan Jackson is a big-time recruit. But Matthew Jones, who also, as you mentioned, was a big-time recruit, coming back from year 6 at center, and then you have Enoch Vamahe penciled in at right guard. That also is, I don't know. I mean, like it's across the board. It is not sort of the typical Ohio State offensive line that you anticipate.
Yeah, Enoch Vamahe was also a solid like top like 150-ish recruit. And
150.
But so there's other guys that fall in. I think Ben Crispin was in that similar range, like 125, and Shabola. Like I think there's a really interesting, if they keep everything else the same, if everything else kind of follows how I'm projecting it, and if they move Matt Jones to center, which we think there's a lot of reason for them to do that, then that right guard battle is pretty interesting too, because you've got the veteran guys, and we've seen the veteran guys kind of step up in their final year sometimes and claim that spot and have one really solid year there. But you're also always open to a guy like Shabola, who, I mean, is just a huge guy. I mean, what he's like 6'6", 330, something like that. I'm really intrigued by him. An in-state guy. I kind of want to see like what he is this spring, because he didn't get a lot of time last year. None of the backup offensive linemen really got a lot of time, but he got a smattering, and somebody unexpected kind of almost has to step up on this offensive line. Like who is it? Like somebody that maybe we're not thinking of jumps up and surprises us. I mean, we knew about DeJuan Jones, obviously, going into 2021. He still seemed like a project, and then all of a sudden he wasn't. All of a sudden it was like, no, DeJuan Jones is going to be somewhere on the All Big Ten list at the end of this year, and is going to be doing real things. And does somebody else jump up and do that this spring, this summer? Sometimes it doesn't happen until more like the summer or preseason. That was the case with Jones. We still weren't thinking about him in a serious way, I don't think, until the preseason camp rolled around and he had really forced the issue. Is there somebody else that happens with? And I don't know if we have that answer by the end of the spring. So we may be in May and June still talking about what's up with this offensive line.
If you think a year ago at this time, right, they were losing Nicholas Petit-Frere and Thayer Munford on the offensive line. They had DeJuan Jones, Paris Johnson, and Luke Whippler coming back. And you just think about that. It's like, okay, well, they have 2 starters replaced. Who's going to replace them? Well, they had Matthew Jones, who had played some the year before as sort of like an injury replacement and had played well, was like the highest PFF graded guy on the offensive line, was that 6th guy, right? It's like, oh, okay, well, Matt Jones is probably going to slide into a starting spot. He seems prepared for that. He's been around a long time. And then you had Donovan Jackson, who they had used as that change your number, offset tight end guy. He's a 5-star recruit, getting his feet under him. They clearly tried to get him on the field a little bit. And it just was like, oh, all right, well, they have 2 starters to replace, but like, here are the replacements. The only guy that you would feel about that way about is Josh Fryer, right? Of this group of like, oh, who makes sense of who's been prepped for this? Because Josh Fryer was the guy that they put number 41 on him, and they used him as a tight end and kind of a little bit extra guy. And then, when they needed someone to play, when Matthew Jones was hurt, Fryer was the best guy. Josh Fryer makes total sense on this offensive line. Again, it's just that he should be number 4, number 5, and instead he's number 3. And that's where the issue is. They usually just have more guys prepped. Whether it's a 5-star ready to go, whether it's a veteran that they've clearly tried to work in and had confidence in the year before. And so Nathan, you said it, I can already hear it. And it's one of these things. It's not about what we say. It's about the reality of the situation. It's not that we're saying your offensive line isn't as good as usual, or doesn't have as many highly recruited players, or doesn't have as much experience. It's that's a fact. It's not that someone talked about it. So when they get mad in the spring, oh, people doubting us. We're doubting us because you right now, Stephen, they are not at the standard. They have not prepared guys. the way that Ohio State typically does. It's just the fact. We're open for surprise. Pat Elflein was recruiting the 900s. And when they had to put him in the Michigan game because Marcus Hall double-birded everybody and they played the Big Ten championship game, he was ready. And then when you came back the next year, he was ready to go. And that was a lower rate of recruit. So I know people sometimes get frustrated when we talk about recruiting and guys year 3 and year 4, but it's not only about recruiting. With young guys, it still is. With older guys, it's about, have they shown that they believe in you? Have they tried to work you in? What have you shown when you got some second team reps? And in both those ways, Stephen, other than Luke Montgomery as a true freshman, in both those ways, with young, highly related recruits early in their career in the pipeline, or veteran guys that have established themselves as maybe the 6th or 7th offensive lineman, they're just short. So don't get mad at the people talking about it. They're short. They knew it. They didn't, we'll get to the one guy because I know Nathan talked to him. They didn't add an obvious answer in the portal, and here we are with a team that has a bunch of 5 stars with a bunch of other places, and we have real questions about the offensive line in a way that I know, like Urban Meyer, when he got here, was talking about like, oh, the offensive line was a mess, and we had the meeting, and we had to come in. But then it was like Andrew Norwell and Jack Muhort and Corey Lindley, like all kind of stepped up into that, and they kind of demanded that of them, and they stepped up into it. I feel like even that was less uncertain than this. I don't think I can remember an offensive line as uncertain as this back maybe till the end of the Tressel era when the Jim Bowman recruiting wasn't going great for a while there. This is not, Stephen, where Ohio State, even though we know it's not at the Heartline Larry Johnson standard of recruiting at receiver and defensive end, right? We know that. Even against sort of the lower standard at offensive line that has existed compared to that, this is short of that. This is not the Ohio State way.
It's last on the pecking order, and there's a gap between that and who was second to last, just based off the talent accumulation. Because as I said earlier, even Donovan Jackson, yeah, he lived in Texas. That kid's from Ohio, man. His entire family is from Ohio, whether it's Northeast Ohio, Cleveland area, or Southern Ohio. That's an Ohio kid, and he'll even tell you that because he told me that when he was in high school. It's whether it's guys who are prepped to just naturally go into the role or it's a competition. Are you optimistic or are you pessimistic about the competition or the guy naturally getting into the role? Because even in 2020, when we were under the idea that, maybe Paris Johnson competes with Nicholas Petit-Frere for the right tackle job as a true freshman, there's good on either side of that because it's either a top 10 national recruit who was the biggest deal in the world that we're getting him, and we have gone as so far, sometimes a little too far, with he's the best offensive line recruit since Orlando Pace talk. Because, I mean, Orlando Pace mentors him, so like we were going that far sometimes. Or it's going to be the other guy who was a 5-star top tackle in his class who's finally ready to go. There's optimism on both sides of that battle. There's optimism with the fact that year 2, Donovan Jackson is ready to go, or year 2, Harry Miller is ready to go as 5-star recruits. I mean, we're talking about battles at right guard and, left tackle. Are we like optimistic that the winner of that battle is still going to be Ohio State standard? Or is it just, this is the guy who won the job because he just so happened to be better than the other guy? But just because you're the best guy for the job doesn't mean you're the best guy possible that Ohio State could have gotten. And I think that's what we're getting at here with this offensive line, that outside of Matthew Jones and Donovan Jackson, the best guy doesn't mean it was the best guy you could have 100% gotten had somebody done their job on the recruiting trail or even the transfer portal this year.
So, Nathan, let's talk about the guy they did add in the portal that you talked to. He's going to be in the mix, but he's not an obvious immediate answer, right?
Correct. Yeah, his name is Vic Cutler. He was the starting left tackle at Louisiana Monroe last year. He had started at center and right tackle prior to that. He told me that he's planning, or has been told, he's going to come in and compete at center. So that would give them another, experienced, veteran presence on the offensive line. As I texted out to our people, our subscribers, as that announcement was made, as his commitment came in, like the Pro Football Focus numbers are bad. Like they're just bad. He was in the 40s, I think, for his grade, which it's a scale of 1 to 100. So people, if you're not that familiar, you can extrapolate from that. And some of his better bad grades were against Alabama and Texas last year. He was in like the 50s, and so he's at least been on the field against that level of play. But listen, this again, we're talking about plan A versus plan whatever, and it's pretty far down the alphabet that Ohio State would be turning to a former 2-star recruit who was not an all-conference player in the Sun Belt to be a solution on the offensive line. That's just the plain truth of it. I said a lot of those things in the text that I sent. Then I talked to the guy the next day, and I was like, "Oh, I feel kind of like a jerk because I told everybody that you're maybe not that great." I didn't say that to him, but that he knows. I think that he's coming here with something to prove, obviously. And it's interesting that he was the one guy that they were able to. But I think this is instructive, and it goes back to what we were talking about before. This is the kind of guy who will leave a starting job and come to Ohio State to compete for a job. Like he'll play, he can probably play on special teams or something, whether he gets a starting job or not. He knows that there's 3 open positions on the offensive line. So those are good odds, I think, to leave the Sun Belt. I think it's Sun Belt, right? To leave Louisiana Monroe as a starter and come up here, a 4-8 team, and come up here and compete to be involved in the situation in some way. And he's from Detroit originally, so he likes to come back to the Midwest. His parents are excited, all those things. That's the kind of guy it makes sense for. It doesn't necessarily make sense for a guy who is starting at Washington State to move all the way across the country and just compete for a job. It makes more sense for him to go home to California. I'm just trying to be analogous to people who wonder why these things aren't happening for Ohio State at a very specific position. And to solve a very specific positional need in the portal in a given year is a crapshoot.
So before we leave offensive line, Nathan, just real quick again, just recap your projected offensive line starters left to right are who?
Yeah, and this could be just as wrong as it was in 2021 when I did it, but I had Zen Michalski at left tackle. I had Donovan Jackson anchoring there at left guard, Matt Jones moving over to center, Enoch Vamahi at right guard. But I think if Jones moves to center, I think there's a really interesting battle at right guard between maybe who knows how many people, and then Josh Fryer at right tackle. Unless somebody else wins at tackle, and then I think Fryer as a guard maybe makes more sense for him positionally, just what he is, but he may have to be a tackle on this team because of where the team is.
And one of the things that I just am trying to think about it, because again, you don't want to only use your comparison back, and guys very well may prove us wrong. But if you just think about it right now, it's like how many draft picks are on that line, right? And how they play is going to determine that. Yeah, but that's like, you know what I mean? Like that's so. Anyway, this is like group number 1 that we are watching in the spring, and everybody is always ready for a surprise. But there's one thing to get a surprise, and there's one thing to need a surprise. And it's tough to need a surprise. And I think they're at a spot where they kind of need a surprise.
Or a couple.